Hey everyone, good morning. Thanks for joining us. I hope you all have your coffee or tea or morning beverage of choice for today's coffee chat. My name is Mara. I'm going to be handling tech for today's conversation. Just a few quick things to note before we get started. You may have gotten a notification from Zoom about this, but this call is going to be recorded and it will be uploaded to VPLC's YouTube channel later on this week or early next week. You'll also receive the link to the recording once it's published if you registered for the chat today via email. And feel free to send me a message during today's conversation if you need help with anything. I'll be in the background for the duration of the chat. And I think that's enough for me. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and turn it over to Jay. Jay, thank you so much for being here today to talk with us about the General Assembly and VPLC's legislative priorities for our session.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining us. So I'm going to give you a quick run through of what we think will be our legislative priorities. And I say think because there are things, for those of you, I'm sorry for those of you that know all about this process, but for those who are less knowledgeable about it, there are things that we push, we write the legislation, we ask the legislators to put it in, and so we know it's coming. There are other things that at the last minute, typically yesterday and today, legislators say, hey, I'm putting this in, what do you think? And so we might give our input there. But more often than not, it's we scroll through the long list of the couple thousand bills that are going to be introduced, and we see these things and we say, what in the world is that? And then we have to decide whether we're going to work on it or not. So this session is going to be probably unlike, this is, I think, my 24th session. Probably going to be unlike any other because of there's two things that really will affect the session. One is the fact that it's an election year. That's not anything unusual. Every other year is an election year in Virginia, for the House of Delegates at least. But what's really unusual is the redistricting. The redistricting that was done last year put a whole lot of legislators, current incumbent legislators, in the same districts. So I think that's going to really have an impact on how they interact with each other. So let's go ahead, Mara. This is just a quick look at the Poverty Law Center's vision, and this is sort of the lens through what we look through our policy work. Go ahead. Next. So this is sort of our theme this year. Poverty is not natural, it's man-made and can be overcome and eradicated. And you know, this it is a choice. It's almost a little depressing to think about the fact that we've chosen to let people live in poverty, but we can do something about it. And policy decisions often have a huge impact on this. Next, please. So that's the session this year starts today, and then runs through February 25th. You know, who knows whether they'll go overtime. Sometimes they go overtime. Sometimes there'll be special sessions later in the year. It's awfully hard to say these days, but that's the current plan for the session. For those of you that don't follow this too much, it starts off slowly in that for us it's really busy because all the bills are dropping today and tomorrow and the rest of this week, and we have to start looking through all the bills. But generally they don't get going until next week as far as starting to hear bills in committee and that sort of thing. So but anyway, that's sort of the usual way that it works. Next slide. So our first slide is on affordable health care. We're very proud of the work we've done in the past on this issue. I think we've been a real leader we were a real leader in getting Medicaid expansion done, which hundreds of thousands of people got access to health care. We have a robust Enroll Virginia program that helps people figure out the private marketplace, but there are still many things to be done. There are there's a couple of those bullet points. Don't take children out of the program when there's a small household income increase, and automatically enroll low-income disabled Virginians into Medicaid. This is kind of a theme for us lately. particularly with this sort of the public benefits, don't make people jump through bureaucratic hoops to get the help they need. I mean, this is a really big problem. We have these programs, we make it so difficult for people to get help they need. And that's what we're sort of gearing towards, is try to do away with some of these bureaucratic hoops. We don't need that stuff. Next slide, please. And it looks like one of our slides got skipped, I think, maybe, but that's all right. I had another one on healthcare. We will work on expanding healthcare to undocumented children and oppose any attacks on immigrant coverage options. And then we also will continue to fight against healthcare junk insurance policies. Some of these, so there it is. Okay. Magically appeared. These, sometimes these professional associations try to push their junk plans, which people end up spending a lot of money for coverage that doesn't really exist. So we'll continue to fight against that kind of thing if it happens. Next slide. So on domestic and sexual violence, we don't have anything very specific here, but there's always a lot of bills that they tend to be somewhat technical, but our overarching theme here as we work to improve the protective order process and make it more accessible to all victims, especially those who are low income. And this is this sort of goes along with the automatic enrollment in public benefits. There is a process where you can get a protective order against somebody who's abusing you, but it's really intimidating, and you don't need to it's really intimidating for people to go to court, without a lawyer. And the truth is, most people are not going to have a lawyer. And so we need to make sure that there's access to justice without a lawyer. That's what we work towards. Next. Okay, affordable housing. You see the pink eviction notice. Unfortunately, thousands and thousands of people in Virginia are getting these notices, and it's just horrendous. We at the Poverty Law Center, we have an eviction legal helpline, and we've just been overwhelmed with calls from people facing eviction, homelessness, and rental increases that are unaffordable. It's just become a huge crisis. So we're going to be working on numerous legislative changes to try to help people. This is just, for many Virginians, it's just an all-consuming, never-ending struggle for safe and affordable housing. And it just sort of just takes over your life. This is the only thing you can think about to try to keep your family safe. Next slide, please. So these are some of the specific things we're going to be working on. We want to increase the eviction reduction fund. There was funding, during COVID to help people pay their rent and stay in their homes, but that's all dried up, and there needs to be a new fund to help people. And that's what most of these are talking about. The rent stabilization under that section, that's kind of a new thing that we're, I forget, I'm not sure who's putting that bill. We've got somebody putting in this bill. Gives localities the option of setting limits on how much residential rates can increase each year. One thing that we're really seeing a trend towards is these out-of-state equity funds, or maybe you call them hedge funds, but it's Wall Street investors. They come and they buy properties in Virginia, and then they jack up the rents, and it's incredible. They actually try to evict like a third of the residents, hundreds of people. It's crazy. So that's what the rent stabilization is sort of geared towards, this kind of business. Security deposit reform. The security deposits have become a big barrier to people finding housing. A lot of people can't come up with 2 months rent to get into housing. We want to reduce that to 1 month. Security deposits are, in my humble opinion, are not what they were intended. At one time, the whole idea is that it's a deposit. So if you damage the property, then the landlord has some funds to pay for your damages. But I really don't think it works that way anymore for the most part, at least not for our clients. I mean, basically the landlords just keep it. And so it's a problem, and forcing people to pay 2 months upfront is just a real barrier to affordable housing. Next. Housing stability, require better notice of any rent increases. And this next bullet point is something we've worked on every single year for years and years. That we've got to improve opportunities for tenants to pay what they owe before landlords file eviction cases in court. We've gotten a lot of good changes to the law here, but there needs to be a lot more done. And people you just have to landlords have just got to give people more time to pay. So, I mean, there's a lot of landlords that, not so many now because of some legislative changes, but a lot of landlords just sort of file eviction cases every month for people who are behind, and it just doesn't make any sense. And what we're trying to do is basically, there's this thing called a pay or quit notice. If you're behind on your rent, your landlord has to give you a notice that says pay your rent or leave. And then if you don't, then they can file an eviction case, and it's 5 days. And for a while, we had it up to 14 days during the pandemic, but that legislation sunsetted. So now we're back to just this 5-day notice. If somebody hasn't paid their rent, it doesn't make any sense to only give them 5 days. You give them 14 days, maybe they'll get paid and they'll be able to pay it. It's really good for landlords and tenants. And then the final bullet point here is the empower localities to bring actions against landlords to enforce health and safety provisions. You may have read about our class action suit in Newport News. We filed against, I think it's called Seaview Towers. Just the whole place was in disrepair, again, owned by an out-of-state landlord who wasn't doing anything. And we filed a class action on behalf of people. And it's still ongoing litigation, but we really need to give localities more power to handle this kind of a situation. Next slide. Okay, another issue, this prohibit holding college transcripts hostage. We had a bill last year that Senator Hashmi carried for us, and she's carrying it again this year. She's already dropped it. It passed the Senate, did not pass the House. We're going to try again. There's a story there. I've talked to many people who have had this problem. This woman named Amber, she completed 3 years at George Mason, and she had to leave. I think her mother got sick, and she had to drop out sort of halfway through the semester. And she had a Pell Grant, which, as I understand it, means that they stopped paying because she dropped out. They wouldn't pay the university tuition because she dropped out halfway through the semester, and so the university is coming after her for the money. And which, that part maybe is understandable. She owes the debt, but they won't give her transcripts to show that she's completed the previous 3 years, so she can't move on and complete her education there or somewhere else. But she's actually trying to go somewhere else, but she can't get admitted somewhere else because they won't give her transcript. But it just seems crazy. It's a bad practice, and the bill requires universities to stop doing that. They've got other ways to collect debts from people. They don't need to do this egregious practice. And there's a lot of people in this boat, apparently. I was very surprised to see that there are many thousands of people that are having this problem. Next. Predatory towing. Towing is a real problem for particularly for low-income folks. It's one thing to tow somebody because they're taking up a spot, and the people who are paying for that spot don't have a place to put their car. But what happens is we have these towing companies enter into contracts with places. Particularly low-income housing landlords will do this, and they just sort of roam around and try to find people who are parked illegally, even though nobody's complaining about those people, just so they can tow them and charge a huge fee. And there's all sorts of other problems. The fees are way too high. that you have these practices where they will not let you get your stuff out of the car. They charge huge storage fees. But all this needs to be better regulated. At the moment, the towing industry is regulating itself. And as somebody told me yesterday, that often does not work out too well. And it certainly doesn't here. There have been 5 bills filed so far on this, and I'm expecting more. And the Attorney General's office filed a lawsuit against a company up in Northern Virginia last year. So it's a problem. Next slide. Affordable energy, something we've been working on now, I guess, 6-7 years. Their electric bills and riders. If you take a look at your electric bill, and you'll see that there are 6 riders. They have a base rate, which our monopoly electric companies are pleased to tell you is one of the lowest in the country, but then they don't remind you, they don't say anything about their riders, which are all these extra car charges, which we currently have 6 of them, which makes our energy too expensive. I think I read yesterday that Dominion filed a 26-page bill to change the regulatory process. This is sort of every year they file. I mean, I'll be amazed if they ever file a bill less than 20 pages long, which for those of you that are not familiar with the process, that's a huge, long bill with a lot of words in it about stuff that some legislators know a lot about and some don't know much about it. But we don't get involved in this fight except on behalf of people who are having trouble paying their bills. And we also will be looking at, hopefully there'll be some legislation about when they can cut people's utilities off, and that sort of thing. So that's what we work on in that area. Next slide, please. The social safety net. We're always working to try to increase the TANF level for people. It's horribly low at the moment, and it has been raised a few times in the past thanks to work that we've done and a lot of other people, a lot of allies, some of whom I see on the call. And then SNAP benefits. There's going to be a decrease in SNAP benefits for the elderly once the federal health emergency ends, which I think it did officially end. And I think somebody can probably correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I think so in February or March, we're going to have this decrease. And so we need to do something about that. So our elderly don't don't have access to proper nutrition. Next slide, please. Care for disabled and older adults. Something we've worked on for years and that legislators have worked on for years is minimum statewide staffing standards. We really thought this would pass last year when the nursing homes somewhat incompetently let a lot of people die in their facilities, probably a lot of times due to lack of staffing. But it never seems to go anywhere. Delegate Watts has brought a bill for, I think, 20 years or something on this. But it really does need to happen. And then the second bullet point there, we will be working to increase funding for the care of residents in assisted living facilities. If the terminology here is, for somebody who needs Medicaid, who needs nursing home care, you have to be basically sick enough or need help with activities of daily living. And then Medicaid can pay for some people to be in a nursing home, but there are other people who just need less assistance, but can't really live on their own, maybe need to live in an assisted living facility. And there is something called an auxiliary grant that helps people pay for that, but it's way, way, way too low and hasn't been raised in a long time. So, and I believe the Joint Healthcare Commission recommended a big increase. So we're hoping that will be in the budget. Next. Family and child welfare. Something we've worked on for a few years now, support proposals to improve legal representation for parents in child dependency cases. So if you get, if the state tries to take your children away for not taking, then the parent is entitled to legal representative, has a lawyer appointed for them, but it's horribly low price. I think it's $75 if I'm not mistaken, or anyway, it's really way too low. And then the second bullet point, we're hearing a lot about over policing of low income families by Child Protective Services. And there seems to be a lot of interest in the legislature to try to put a stop to some of this. I mean, literally telling people that they can't let their kids climb trees and stuff like that. I mean, it's crazy. Next slide. Okay, now that's my list. Now, can we go to the website? I just want to show you quickly what's on our website and how you can get involved. Yeah, so if you go on our website, you'll click on the legislative advocacy thing, and then you'll see our priorities. Can you scroll down? And it's basically the same things I just talked about, but keep going, please. And then how to follow the session. So you can find legislation. You can watch the Senate and House committees online if you want a link to how to find that, and keep going down. And then you can see who we have working on different issues. We have 13 of us that are registered lobbyists, work on a whole lot of issues. Keep going. And then the last thing there is just, you ought to, if you're really interested, you ought to join our email list, and we'll do a weekly update. And then we periodically do what we call action alerts, and it'll be basically, call your senator or your delegate on the Senate Commerce and Labor Committee and tell them to vote no on Senate bill, blah, blah, blah. And we make it really easy. So you just sort of make a few clicks, and then they get your email saying, please vote no on this. I think a lot of people think that stuff's kind of a waste of time, but it really isn't. You'd be surprised. With all this legislation, most legislation gets like zero reaction from the public. And when they start hearing from people on a particular bill, they take, there's much more, they take a second look at it, and it can make a big difference. So that's all I have. I'm not sure where we are with time. Where are we? Oh, so we got time for questions. I will do my best. If it's my area, I know something about it. If it's not my area, I don't want to know a whole lot about it, but there might be somebody else on the line that can help me. So shoot. Are they in the chat?
Yeah, feel free to unmute and ask a question directly, or if you have a question you feel more comfortable typing up, then just drop it in the chat.
Yeah, there was a good comment in the chat from Eric Chapman, that you should give people more time to pay the rent, give resident services and community stakeholders more time to assist residents. As you can imagine, there are people out there who are trying to help people, but it's not good when they get contacted the day before the person's being put out by the sheriff. That kind of stuff makes it really difficult.
Hey Jay, this is Dathan.
Hey Dathan, how you doing?
Hey, all right. Anticipating probably some pushback on the security deposit lowering bill, and I'm wondering, would there be a way to craft that to distinguish between higher end rentals and lower income rentals, so you could protect the folks that are the least likely able to pay 2 months rent? But I know the landlord lobby will probably push pretty hard on that. I would just assume. So I'm wondering if there's been thought of having that as a leverage piece, to not leverage, but a backup plan to still protect those lower income renters, but to have just a 1 month security deposit. But is that feasible to make a distinction there?
It's a good suggestion. And every bill is a negotiation, so you never know. I mean, I'm not the one that will negotiate on that. But yeah, I think it's pretty clear the landlords aren't going to like that. So it's, stay tuned. We'll see what happens with it. But Yeah, there's always, no matter what legislation, it's almost no bill that ever gets introduced that just passes the way it was introduced. There's always lots of input, lots of changes.
Jay, concerning TANF, the income disregard, an incentive for TANF recipients to, seek and go to work, or to make work pay. I know there's a demonstration in Wisconsin when they allowed to keep more of their income, they get off welfare quicker and they stay off. So there's a lot to be said for that. And also about the partial sanction, punishing the children for the mistakes of their parent because they haven't met some small requirement on the number of job contacts or something. So can you comment on those?
Well, first of all, John, thank you for your many, many, many years of advocacy on this issue.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate it. And I don't know the details unless I don't think there's anybody on here because our main public benefits lobbyist is sick, I think. So she's
Oh, sorry to hear that. Yeah, she's good.
Yeah. But it's sort of a general answer. We really have got to get away from this judging people and punishing people with regard to the people who need help. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Maybe it makes some people feel good to judge people who are getting benefits or something, but it doesn't make any sense from a policy standpoint and from any standpoint and from a humanitarian standpoint. And we got to get away from that, and we should not be punishing children by all means. I think we can all certainly agree on that.
Thank you.
It looks like we have a question in the chat also, Jay. Randy asked, any efforts to supplement SNAP after the emergency allotment ends or emergency allotments end?
I don't think we have anything in particular that we're pushing there, but there may be something that somebody's going to try to put into the budget. Don't know. Sorry.
Jay, sorry, this is Sarah. I think it's Cassie is working on the increasing the allotment for older folks, as you said, but the emergency allotments were pretty significant. It was a significant amount of federal funding, and there's nothing at that scope being worked on at the state level that I'm aware of.
So I see another question from Jordan. Any push for the rent stabilization tied to the locality's consumer price income index? As far as I know, that's not going to be part of the legislation. But again, that's what the kind of thing that can play out during the session, and changes might be made. But it's also, when you point out the locality's CPI, I mean, Virginia has this incredible gap between Northern Virginia and Southwest Virginia as far as what rent costs, what people are being paid, or what the cost of living is. And it's a problem sometimes when they make legislation and they make it blanket, because it's just what works in Southwest does not work in Northern Virginia sometimes. Yeah, and Randy put in there, seniors will be hit hardest by the end of SNAP. EA, I forget what, I think, Sarah, you know what that means, I don't. And Cassie is working on that. Emergency allotment, that's what that is.
Yeah, the emergency allotment, yeah.
That took me a minute.
And yes, kind of because seniors get such a low SNAP on allotment on a regular basis, the emergency allotment really increased. what they were getting. So they got kind of the biggest boost and will get the biggest drop in benefits, is my understanding. Again, Cassie is the expert. So we'll be really, really hard hit, especially, you know, now we all know groceries are just costing quite a bit more. So yeah, we're really, really concerned.
Jay, just FYI, Saturday we testified before the Off to Richmond hearing. There's about 20 legislators. And Senator Favola came over and told me that she's putting in ending the full family sanction. So
great.
That's very positive development.
Right. Oh, there's a lesson for all of us. You know, you show up at one of these sessions and you get a real chance to talk to somebody, and lo and behold, they put in something you want them to put in. I mean, it's
Exactly.
All right, well, we're at the 9:30 mark. So unless anybody has any last minute questions they'd like to ask, I think that we're gonna wrap things up. Jay, thank you so much for speaking today. Packed a lot of information into a short amount of time, which is great. And everybody be on the lookout for more information. We'll have a follow-up email with the recording from today, and any of the links that that we talked about today, like the legislative advocacy page and things like that. So thank you so much for joining, and I hope everybody has a good Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.